Hello again, retro gaming fans. Ryan Mcquinn here. I think it's about time I made a video showing everything I figured out about Mucom88's usage and features. So for the first part, I'll break down each of the 6 FM channels and the 3 SSG channels. There are 2 other channels, K and G, but I haven't figured out the proper usage for either of those yet. I will make another video when I do figure those out. Well, okay, here's part 1. Now here we are at part 1, and it's going to be a brief part, but necessary to go through and just break down what the channels do. Now, like it says up here with the YM2203, you can only use A through F, but since we're going to be doing this for the sake of either making music, or making music for a Sega Genesis ROM, the YM2608 is the sound chip used in there, so we can use all A to K. And this also specifies up here that G track is the rhythm source and K track is for ADPCM, and they differ in ways and how they are described in MML. Like I said, once I figure those out, I'll do a separate video on that. It'll probably be a brief one just to show it, but I'll do it anyway. Now you have the first 3 right here are FM tracks, and these have a maximum possibility of 256 instruments. I believe it's 0 through 255. It could be 255 instruments, but most of them are already done in the voice file anyway. We'll go over how to modify that and just use it later on. I'm not quite sure what SSG stands for, but I do know that you only have a maximum of 16 instruments in here. So you have, 0 is like a more synthesizer type sound, and as you go up, you'll go through like different string instruments or some percussion instruments. You just kind of have to play around with it to see which one would work best, or whatever your notes you're trying to play on a channel. These I would use for, say like a background sound, like a snare drum banging to a rhythm. And anything that is more intricate, that you hear more in the foreground, that's actually the, the harmony and everything, I would use for the FM channels. Now there are another set of FM channels in this OPNA feature. Ignore it, it's for the 2203. And today we're just going to be using A through F and HI and J. That's pretty much what we're covering. So, in a nutshell, that's pretty much each channel. I guess we can just move on to part 2 now. Okay, so for part 2, I'll show you this right here. We'll go ahead and create a new file. And it's going to be using the Bear 2, which is the Streets of Rage 2 PCM file, which means it'll also be the same voice.dat file over here. And as far as the parts of MML go, let's start with channel A. And we'll say a clock count of the default 128 for Mucom88. And we'll go with, you can do tempo if you want, if you know the beats per minute. It's just when you convert them over with convert FMML, it doesn't always do it accurately. If you can find out the beats per minute for the song you're trying to create or convert, you can go ahead and use that. So say it was 120 beats per minute, you could do the capital T with a 120. What I typically like to do is just regular timing, and I do between 200 and 210. We'll start out with the faster speed. We'll go ahead and just pick, this is more like a piano, 63. And let's go ahead and do a volume of 13, just a random number, and an octave right in the middle of 4. So here's your basic layout of the first line, just to, I guess you'd say, initialize everything. And we'll go down and play a few notes. So there are 2 different ways of playing these notes. Now you can go ahead and say we'll go with G, and this little up arrow this would be a full 4 out of 4 on the note scale. And then F, another 4 out of 4. And we'll go ahead and try and play this. That's pretty much it. Now, the way this is set up, it's bent on time here, so we can actually say we remove the clock out of here, it'll still play. Now, if we were to turn around and say, do it like the converted MIDIs do it on how I showed in the other video. Say we put a 2 and 4 here, and we'll try and play that. Cuts out a little quicker. Pretty much I think this is divisible by the clock count, which is normally up here, or just the time. So we'll go ahead and put this back to 128. Same thing. I've also noticed if I try and put a higher number, say 64, it'll cut out quicker there, but if I delete the clock, okay, it made me a liar. Sometimes I'll get an error. You do, however, want to leave the clock in here if you're converting over for a Sega Genesis ROM or Streets of Rage 2 ROM that uses the Mucom driver. Just because that's what it uses. It doesn't use time or tempo, it just uses this to dictate how fast it's going to be played. Now, these are just regular notes, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and you have your different octaves like you would see if you were to look at the octaves on a piano. You have 1 through 8 in this case. So I'm going to bring those back in. Let's go ahead and go into a higher octave. And we can go into a lower one. That's pretty much how that works. Or if you really wanted to, you can put this up arrow to up an octave, which is basically just a right facing arrow, or right pointing arrow. And it should start in the octave of 2, and then jump up to the octave of 3. Let's make this last a little longer. I can go up 2 octaves, and then I'll bring it to 4. And bring it to 5 if you want. Now you can also set a large L here, which will loop the entire section here. Like down here, you can just press escape or F5 to start or stop it. Now, let's go ahead and bring this down here, but we'll change what notes are being played. We'll do B and C. And it'll go from here, it'll go G, F, B, C, and just loop that. That's a very obnoxious sound. Or we can take this L out of here. We can even put it after this, and what'll happen is it'll just loop these two. So it counts it as an L before this one. So anyways, what I usually do for the songs that are in a Streets of Rage 2 ROM is I just loop the entirety of it. So it keeps on playing that track over and over again. Say you're in the middle of a stage, you don't want it to stop halfway through the stage and you have nothing but silence. I think that should cover this part. Let's go ahead and jump to part 3 now. Okay, so for part 3, we'll focus on the FM tones coming from the FM channels A, B, C, and HIJ. Now, you'll notice over here that whenever we pick one, I mean, this one's not labeled, but it doesn't really matter, we know what it sounds like now. Let's go ahead and, you know what, let me bring up the little help guide. Okay, like I said in the last video, I am definitely not a musician, not professional in that by any means. I used to play instruments in school, but that's neither here nor there. These are the instruments that I've come across that are actually coded into the Beartooth voice stat file. And we'll go ahead and pick a somewhat mellow one. You know what we'll do? We'll do the synth, which is 20, I believe. Yes. And hear what that sounds like. Let's bring that volume down a bit. And we'll see over here that it shows up with the instrument that it is. Now, this over here, actually, I recently found out you can modify, using these values here, what sound actually comes out. And you could even go right past the end because you can see that this only goes up to 234, and we have up to 255 actually. So there's 1 through 255, I was off by 1. Anyways, let's go to, say, 235. Quick way to get there. And you can see I've already been messing with it. So we can actually change these values here. Where is the multiplier? Right there. Better to use arrow keys. And you have a key over here that tells you what to press to change each value. So we'll press enter to go in and we'll change this to say 15. And we'll hear what it sounds like. Kind of an obnoxious sound, but... And then see what changes when we set it to 0. Not really much. I've pretty much just been experimenting with this, and I don't know a whole heck of a lot about it. But you can go ahead and modify this file to your heart's content because it'll be in the same package. If you mess something up, just drag it out of the archive and replace it. I mean, I guess there's a slight difference, but not by much. Let's go and change the feedback on it. We'll say to 0. I can kind of hear a difference. Anyways, you can use the instruments that are already built in, or you can modify them or try and create your own. It's totally up to you. You can even change the algorithm that's being used. It's pretty much the one we just changed right there. So you have 0 through 7, 7th algorithm, where they all play at once, but one loops back on itself. Kind of doesn't sound much different, but I would think with a softer tone you might notice a difference. That's pretty much it for this section. Let's go ahead and go on to the next section now. Okay, so for this section, I'm going to include a few more of these MUC files. We'll play one right now just to show you so you can actually get an idea of when they're converted over, what's going on. Let's play this one real quick. I think you get it. When we have a look over here, you'll notice that you'll have channels A, B, C, H, I, and J. There's no D, E, F in here. That's because they're SSG channels, and this is only something that will change the FM tones. There's no real way that I've seen so far. I don't think there is a way to change the SSG. So pretty much go through, and like I showed in the previous section, you can set it up so that way you have, say channel D initialized, and pick instrument 0 and just have it play a note in whatever octave you want to choose. I would just pick a mid-range just to see the typical sound. And go ahead and try each instrument 0 through 15, and you can note down what they sound like to you and go ahead and use those channels for whichever section of a song you've converted or just trying to build from scratch. Now, they have different ones on each side. From what I can tell, this is because channel A starts off as a horn, but switches over to, looks like some sort of electronic piano maybe? I'm not sure, but it switches from 57 to 26 partway through this section right here. So I don't actually see it in there. I could be wrong, but there are times when you can say do this, and right in the middle of it, we'll do it sooner. You can pick, like, say, at 63, and it'll change it to that piano sound again. So we'll go ahead and play it and see when it changes. Doesn't sound really good with that in there. But you get the idea that you can change the instrument partway through. So say you want to go from playing it from a string instrument to a wind instrument, you can go ahead and do that. Now, you will run into problems, or probably will run into problems, where you have to troubleshoot what's going on. And I will also now go over possible errors that you'll come up to and ways of correcting them. Okay, so for starters, when you've converted a file over, say a MIDI file with convert FMML, and I typically like to stay around files that are about 40 kilobytes or less, just because when they convert, they'll have too much data for this program to process. Now you might have noticed that, here I'll show you. Now you saw over here, when I played this, so you have text and data. If it goes over 100% a little bit, I've noticed it's fine. Like I've had ones where the data was over 107 and the text was over about 101. It still played, but you'll get what's called a music data overflow. So I can show you this by just copying this to the bottom here. Let me saw the data increased, but if I keep going with it, not only, well, octave out of range, that's because these octaves keep on increasing or decreasing partway through. Yeah, we're just going to get octave out of range again. Let's try and do this with a different channel. This one doesn't look like it changes octaves. So you saw how we were at 101. Let's add a little bit more. There we go. Music data overflow. Has too much in it. I think, don't quote me on this, I think the threshold is about 110% for text and data. I don't honestly know what the difference between text and data is in there, but regardless, if you have too much music data in there, your MIDI file is probably too big. You might want to use something like MIDI editor to chop out some of the sections of it, because for most songs that I found, especially with gaming, there's a lot of repeat sections. And you don't need to have a bunch of repeats in there because you can just loop the song. So if you were to, say, find out that the first minute of the song is the same thing as the next minute of the song, just chop out the second half and try as hard as you can to get it to get down within that, 100% range, 110% range. Now there's also other errors you may run across. Remember how channels D, E, and F can only use instruments, say, 0 through 15. And this one I have 9, this one's 9, and F is 13. So let's see what happens if we, say, just add a 1 to each at the end of each. How much the song will change because these sections will not work. Right there at the beginning, it's quite different. We'll go ahead and take one off at a time. We can start hearing some of the background sounds coming back in. Right there, you'll see that these channels won't function with any of the FM instruments. Now, there's also a different problem that you may run into where they might just not play in here. If you were to have this error in here and then convert this into, or compile it to a MUB and try and insert it into a Streets of Rage 2 ROM, that ROM will actually crash because it doesn't know what to do with that instrument on that SSG channel. So that could be one issue that you run into when you're trying to get it to play in a Streets of Rage 2 ROM that I didn't know until I started making the plans for this video anyway. Now, as I briefly mentioned before about crashing, if you do convert a MUC file that's, say, around 100 kilobytes or more, and you try and open it in here, from what I gather, there's not enough memory allocated to accommodate for holding all of that music data in there, so it may just crash on load. And you might also run into the problem where it does load it, but then immediately crashes. Now, there's two possibilities for that scenario where there's either too much music data in there, or there might be too much music data on one line. So, say that, sake of argument, let's delete a few lines. This might actually still play, but I've had scenarios where it went on for like 5 or 6 lines, and it just couldn't compile all of that at once to play it. Okay, so in this case it does work. But if you run into a scenario where it crashes on load, two things to check would be if there's too much music data, or if there's too much on one line. So if you have, say, one continuous line of data going down, just separate it onto a different line. So say it was like this, and this B section, or this section right here, is actually 3 lines. You can go ahead and just try and separate it by doing that. Now they're on separate lines. It'll still play all the way through correctly, but if you don't do that, it could cause a crash. That's just one thing to look out for. Alright, so for this part, let's go ahead and convert our MIDI file. Now, I've looked in different places for these. You can just Google it, and usually the Kingdom Hearts Insider has a few. And I've had issues where, I'll show you actually with these two that I had just downloaded with this, where I can't load this one in because it says fails clock count conversion. What this is when it tries to convert the notes over into the proper sequence for, I guess you'd say, playback, it can't calculate it, probably because some of the notes may be, you know, it could be in a scale of 1/3, or it's just how it calculates it. Instead of being instead of being a multiple of 2, it could be a multiple of 3 instead, and it can't convert something like that. I don't know the ins and outs of how MIDIs work. That's just one thing that I can gather that may be happening, because I've tried, say, importing one that does work in, and I've tried to change the clock count, but nothing helps. So if you have one that just says that it can't convert because of the clock count, don't waste your time on it, find a different one. So now that we have one in here, and we see that it uses all 4 channels, well, 4 out of the 9 channels we can use, we'll go ahead and convert this. I do have one that's already converted for this song, but we'll go ahead and just use this and rename it to go through how it was done. We'll call this test. Now it's not going to auto-update in here, so just go, say, into a folder and then back out of a folder. And it's called Castle Low Test. And we'll go into it. Now, right off the bat, you'll see that there's no volume, so it's not going to play any of the instruments. We can minimize this for now. So we'll just set it at volume 10, and we'll hear the first sound and how it sounds. Okay, now if you want to get an accurate conversion over from what instrument is what, you can go ahead and come up. It does not want to come back up for me. Let's minimize that real quick. There we go. So we can open up the MIDI and say I use MIDI editor. It's nice free software. And we'll open up that MIDI that we just converted. And we can cut out every instrument, but go one at a time. Sometimes if you do this first one, it doesn't play anything, because I think it's just a rhythm track, possibly. Oh, here it goes. That was not the instrument that was playing. We'll go with this one. That sounds more like it. Going a bit slow, so we'll go ahead and put a time in here. A little fast. We'll go with 200. Still a little too fast. Does that sound about right? Yes, it does. Okay. Not the right instrument, but we can go from there. Now you only need to designate the time in one section. Doesn't matter what channel it's in, just make it in only one. We'll go ahead and give this a volume of 10 and see what this is. To me, the original MIDI kind of sounds kind of obnoxious, and I don't really like how the whistle on the back is really high pitched, so when it comes over into the MML section, I'm probably going to change that. But this, to me, tells me that it should be like a synthesized sound, like a instrument 20. Just like I said before, play around with it one section at a time, one channel at a time. Not entirely right. Oof, I do not like that whistle sound. Anyways, we can go through and just add volume to each section and hear it. And this would be the last section. Now with this, since we actually have the ability to, or rather we have extra FM channels we can use, we can go ahead and change this over to, say, channel H, just by changing all these capital D's to H. Now there's one thing I didn't really mention yet, and what that is I would suggest copying the entirety of this over into Notepad, just in case you make a mistake. Of course, I have caps lock still on. So if you make a mistake, you can just copy and paste the section over that you made a mistake in. But let's go ahead and let's see what that is supposed to be. And that's not it. That's not it either. Sounds like a cymbal. Nothing for a cymbal in there. I believe the snare drum may have a similar sound. Let's go ahead and try 58. Sounds very similar, but let's go ahead and see what I came up with ultimately. You know what? I had forgotten that I had renamed it to the game that it was actually from. So I went with 37 at the top, which is the piccolo. Let's go ahead and see how this sounds. Kind of a little fast. I think it could still use some work, but much better than what we started with, I think. Now I did keep channel D in here, to keep instrument 0. Okay. There are a few others, and like I said, I'm going to be including these songs in there, like the palace theme from Legend of Zelda. Well, Legend of Zelda 2. And I like how it came out because it kind of sounds like something that would go in a horror film. To me, anyway. One other thing I wanted to show, now that this reminds me of it. So when I converted this, it only had 3 channels used. What I did was I took this one and copied it down here, but put it into a lower octave and a different instrument. So it gave it a different sound. So you heard how that one sounds. Hopefully you can hear the difference. And put that back in. It kind of gives it like a little echo effect, if that makes any sense. Anyways, you can do this with any of the channels if you want. If you wanted to just give it like a little more, a little different of a sound. Sometimes you'll have 2 instruments that actually complement each other. Bear in mind, you'll also have times where 2 instruments just sound like garbage together. But I encourage you to play with it and see what you can come up with. Just experiment. Let's go ahead and hear one more song. You saw how this was 109 and 103, right on the edge. I mean, right on the edge when it comes to music overflow. But I like how that one came out. That's pretty much it. Like I said, if you have any questions, feel free to contact me. You can contact me through social media accounts below on Discord, or you can just leave a comment below. Before I forget, I did mention in the comments section of the ROM editor video that I would look into replacing the Streets of Rage 2 music with Streets of Rage 1 music. And while I did find the music in the Streets of Rage 1 ROM, it's in a format that is similar to the one used in Streets of Rage 2, but unfortunately it's not a simple copy and paste, and will take some time to research. I know it's a lot to take in, but I'll have the timestamp set up in the description, so you can skip to the section you need to review. You can also contact me with any questions you may have on Mucom88, the Streets of Rage 2 ROM editor, or anything I've covered on our channel. As always, there are links in the description to our social media groups, including our Discord server, also links to the materials referenced in this video such as Mucom88. Well, thanks again for watching and have a good one.